I'd like to tell you a little bit why I came to love Notre Dame. You know, I grew up in New York City, was never west of the Hudson River, and I followed Notre Dame football, but never dreamed in a million years that I would come to Notre Dame. My father, in World War II, was in the Pacific with the Marine Corps, and he met Coach Holtz. No, Lou wasn't with him then. How about this for a change? Moose Krause. Yeah, Moose was out there. He was a Marine, worked with my father. And on those nights out in the jungle, when the fighting was limited, Moose would actually get up and talk to these young Marine lieutenants and officers. And there was nothing to talk about except Notre Dame. And he would tell them about Knute Rockne and the Four Horsemen and George Gipp, who Moose played for Rockne, of course. And he had a lot of great stories. I mean, he was a great storyteller anyway. And so my father became intrigued and loved what he was hearing and said, my son's going to go there. And sure enough, on a September night, 6 p.m., Sunday night, at the Grand Central Station, I got on a train, and 12 hours later, got off at 6 a.m. in South Bend, Indiana, and there was a bus, and there was the LaSalle Hotel. That's how long ago it was. And they got on the bus, and we all drove up to Notre Dame, and on the way up Notre Dame Avenue, this kid yelled out, hey, there's the Golden Dome. And I looked out, and sure enough, the Golden Dome, a lady standing on it, brilliant early morning sunlight on it. It was very moving, very touching. That night, we went to see Knute Rockne, All-American, in the Washington Hall. That's what they showed the freshmen in those days. And there was Pat O'Brien playing Rockne and Ronald Reagan playing George Gipp. And then I went to my first pep rally. And I had never been to a pep rally before. I didn't know what it was all about. And to see that team come in, and they just weren't high school kids, they were hardcore veteran soldiers from World War II, Jungle Jim Martin, people like that. And there was Frank Leahy, the coach. And it was wonderful. I mean, I never heard such cheering, and everybody was up. They hadn't lost a game in the 3 years Leahy had returned from the war. And so it was a big night, and one I'll never forget. And then Leahy took a couple of minutes out to talk to the freshmen, to tell them what they should experience at Notre Dame and how they should treasure every moment they have at this school, because once they leave, they will never experience any place like this place again in their lifetimes. And he was right. So we had a wonderful talk from him, and we went out to see the game, and of course we won every game that year as well. So 4 years in a row, Notre Dame had won every, or at least not had lost in a game in the 4 years. And in the 5th year, sophomore year, on a September day, something like today, it was overcast, went to see the second game of the season against Purdue. They got a quarterback named Dale Samuels, who just kept throwing the ball, got hot, beat us 28-14. Well, no one at the school at that time, in the 5th year of this team returning and playing, had seen Notre Dame lose a game. It was just unbelievable. I mean, it really hurt. It was damaging. We just sat there in the rain that started to come down and said, how could this happen? So we all walked around to the locker room door where the team goes into the locker room, and we waited there for the coach to come out and talk to us. And the crowd got bigger and bigger, and there was a tree just not too far from that locker room door. And this kid, I'll never forget it, climbed up the tree so he could get a better view of what was going to happen, because this was really a different moment in all of our lives. So anyway, the door finally opened, and there was Frank Leahy, looking a little gaunt, a little beat up. And he didn't explain to us how or why we lost that game, but that one day you will have a loss in your life. It's unavoidable. It's going to happen. And you should use this loss today at a football game to build yourself up, to make yourself stronger, to give you more resolve, that these losses will not interfere with your life, that you will continue to strive, to succeed, to win. It was a wonderful talk. Went back, felt a lot better, and life went on. Anyway, you all know that I was in television for many years. And every chance I got, I used to tell people about Notre Dame, how special it was, how different it was, how great it was just to walk on that campus. And there are some people who thought maybe I was exaggerating. But so they would ask me, how great really is it? And I told them from my heart, and I mean it, it's the closest experience you will ever have to being in heaven. Now that may sound like I was exaggerating. I wasn't. I really believe it. I live in New York City. I've seen all the good, a lot of the bad, and the very ugly. And when you come back to Notre Dame, you think you're in heaven. You really do. So I've had ups and downs in this television business. Some of you may recall. I worked for a long time, and then suddenly it went flat. Couldn't get a job out in Hollywood or in LA. So I went on the road. I went to Denver, Colorado. I did the sports casting and the early news and the later news. I had a talk show in St. Louis on Saturday nights. And then finally I wound up in Chicago. And there was a morning show there. This is before Good Morning America. Every station had its own little talk show. And so I began to work on this talk show in the morning, and it became a hit. I loved it. I loved being in Chicago. I went back to LA and I told my family and all my friends, we're moving to Chicago. I'm going to get this job. I know it. In late September of that year, I found out I wasn't going to get the job. Somebody else was going to get it. Well, it was like, a stab in the heart. Here I had been 21 years since I graduated from Notre Dame, and I'm roaming around the country like a bum looking for a job anywhere I can, and I hated it. I got on the car that I had rented to go to the airport. Instead of turning right on that freeway that takes you out to the O'Hare Airport, I turned left. I didn't know where I was going. I just continued to drive. Wound up on a bridge somewhere, kept going, and I found myself on the Indiana Tollway. And there was a sign, South Bend 20 miles. This is in 1974. I said, I'm going to go back. George Kelly, the linebacker coach, was a dear classmate of mine. I loved him. And I had on my Chicago show, Ara Parsegian came in. I had met him before. I also got Tony Zale, a prize fighter that I admired when I was growing up in New York City, who was a coach at a CYO place in Chicago. So I said, I'm going to go back to Notre Dame. And as I drove up Notre Dame Avenue, there was that golden dome. There was that lady on top of it, sun shining on her. Late, not too late on an August afternoon. Went around the corner, because in those days you could drive by the stadium. And I said, there was a stadium. And as I drove, I slowed down. I wanted to take a good look at it. And there was that door, the locker room door. And there was that tree not too far from the door, where all of this happened so many years ago, where Coach Leahy came out and told us that one day there's going to be a loss in your life. You've got to make yourself stronger. Don't let it get you down. You've got to build from that. And that's what I did. I just said, yes, I am going to make it. I'm going to go back there and make it happen. And it was that moment when I was a sophomore, when we lost the game, and I thought that was the end of my world, that brought me back. And then I went out and went into the locker room and met with the coaches. They threw me a T-shirt and a pair of sneakers, and I ran out on the field, actually caught a few passes. You would have been proud of me. And then they, remember Ara said, well, we're going to time the new freshman quarterbacks. And so I had the watch, and I helped them time them. And the slowest quarterback there was a guy named Joe Montana. And I loved that name, Joe Montana. Sounded like a cowboy, And what a quarterback he became. So I went back to LA, started all over again, scratch, and went out and did it, and went to New York and worked 28 straight years and just left the show last November. But if it hadn't been coming to Notre Dame and being a part of the spirit here and hearing all the things that the coach had to say about life, and they all came true, I don't know where I'd be right now. So I'm happy to be here with all of you, and of course, I'm not the only one who loves Notre Dame. I know everybody in this room does, just as much as I do. But since there isn't room on stage or enough time in the day to have all of you come up here and tell me your stories, we've invited a few special guests to join us on stage this morning to share their Notre Dame stories.